Okay, so you wanted to know more about Tamiya, right? It seems like they're everywhere in the model world, but maybe you're not quite sure what makes them so special.
Yeah, they've definitely got a big presence.
So we thought we'd take a deep dive into Tamiya, looking at what makes them tick, and yeah, but we'll even touch on some of the criticisms that get thrown their way.
It's always good to get the full picture right, not just the marketing hype.
Exactly. And to do that, we're really digging into some firsthand insights, especially from a great YouTube channel called Michael's Modellbaustube. This guy's a real model builder, so he gives us a great perspective from someone who's actually working with these kits day in and day out.
Sounds like a perfect starting point.
I think so. And the first thing that jumps out is that Tamiya, well, they've been around for a while. It all started back in 1946, officially, as Tamiya Shoji, founded by a guy named Tamiya Yoshio.
So this is post-World War II Japan.
Right. And what's really interesting is that Mr. Tommy, he wasn't always in the model business.
Yeah.
Before the war, he was actually in the wooden transport business.
Whoa, that's a completely different world.
I know, right? But then in 1945, a fear destroyed his business, forcing him to start over.
Talk about a setback.
Seriously. But he was resilient. He pivoted and started selling wooden models in 1948.
So those classic wooden ship models and things like that.
I think so. It was a
Yeah.
different era of model building, for sure. Then just a few years later, in 1951, another fire hit the business.
Oof, tough break.
It was.
Oh,
But the second fire kind of marked a turning point. They decided to focus entirely on model building and really embrace the new technology of plastic injection molding.
that was a smart move. Plastic's so much more versatile than wood for models.
Definitely.
Mm.
And that decision really laid the foundation for the Tamiya we know and maybe love today.
From wooden carts to plastic model kits, quite a journey.
Totally. And here's another thing that's interesting to me. The founder, Tamiya Yoshio, he passed away in 1988, but the company, it's still family-owned to this day.
That's pretty rare these days for a company to stay in the family for so long.
It is. And I wonder if that has
Yeah.
something to do with their reputation for quality. Maybe that long-term family ownership means they're less focused on squeezing every last penny out of each kit and more focused on building a legacy of excellence.
That's an interesting thought. It could be that family businesses take a different approach. They're thinking generations ahead, not just next quarter's profits.
Right, and that might translate into a willingness to invest in better materials,
Yeah.
more precise engineering things that ultimately lead to a higher quality product, even if it costs a little more.
Yeah, because sometimes you do get what you pay for.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got a little bit of background now. Let's dive into what specifically makes Tamiya models so popular. What is it about them that draws people in?
Well, one of the first things Michael talks about is just the sheer variety of models they offer.
He wasn't kidding. They've got something for everyone.
Seriously.
Yeah.
They've got ships in 1700 scale, which they call their waterline series, perfect for anyone who's into naval history.
I've always been fascinated by those massive warships.
Me too. Then they've got a huge range of military vehicles in a bunch of different scales. The popular 135, 172, and 148.
Ah, so for people who maybe aren't familiar with model scales, those numbers just mean how much smaller the model is compared to the real thing. So like a
Yeah.
135 scale tank is 35 times smaller than an actual tank.
Exactly. So you can choose the scale that works best for you, whether you want a really detailed model or something a little smaller.
And it's not just military stuff. They've also got civilian vehicles in 124 scale, those amazing racing cars in 112 and 120, and even motorcycles up to 16 scale.
Yeah, they cover pretty much every base. No wonder they're so popular. They've got something to appeal to just about every type of model builder.
Totally. And we should mention, Michael also pointed out that they have a big presence in the world of RC cars and trucks. But for this deep dive, we're sticking to the plastic model kits.
Yeah, those are their bread and butter, for sure.
Okay, so variety is one thing. But Michael also talks about the level of detail in Tamiya kits. I was really impressed by it.
He even quotes, "Good is now nothing new, but exactly that has clearly set this manufacturer apart from the competition since the early years."
It sounds like they were one of the first companies to really prioritize accuracy and detail in their models.
And to achieve that level of detail, they must have invested heavily in things like really precise tooling and mold-making processes.
Which would have given them an edge for years because those early investments would let them consistently produce really sharp, well-defined parts.
Yeah, those crisp details make a huge difference in the final model. They make it look more realistic and more satisfying to build.
And that leads us to another big plus for Tamiya, the engineering of their kits. Michael says that even complex-looking parts often fit together surprisingly easily.
Yeah, that's not always the case with other brands. Sometimes you end up fighting with the parts more than you're actually building.
I've heard some horror stories, but to me, they seem to put a lot of thought into how their kits go together.
And that makes a huge difference for the builder. It means less time spent filling gaps, sanding things down, and generally fiddling around, and more time spent on the fun stuff like painting and weathering.
And it makes the whole experience more enjoyable, especially for beginners.
Definitely. It can be really discouraging to struggle with a poorly designed kit, but with Tamiya, you can usually be confident that the parts will fit together the way they're supposed to.
I love that Michael even uses the term Schüttelbausatz to describe some of their kits.
Schüttelbausatz, what does that mean?
He says it's a German term that basically means a kit that's so well engineered you could almost just shake the box with glue and a finished model would pop out.
Haha, okay, so maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration.
Just a tad. But it really illustrates how much emphasis Tamiya puts on making their kits easy to assemble.
And that's a big selling point for a lot of people,
Yeah.
especially if you're looking for a more relaxing and less frustrating building experience.
For sure. Okay, so the last big positive Michael mentions is the availability of Tamiya's accessories tools, and especially paints.
He says he doesn't know a model shop that doesn't stock something from Tamiya.
It's true. They're everywhere, which is really convenient because it means you can usually find everything you need to build a Tamiya kit all in one place.
Yeah, it just makes the whole process easier. You don't have to hunt around for specific paints or tools. Everything's right there.
So far, it sounds like Tamiya is the perfect model company, right? But Michael also talks about some criticisms that people have, and some of them are pretty valid.
Let's hear it. What are the downsides?
Well, the biggest one, and this is something a lot of people bring up, is the price. Tamiya kits can be expensive.
Yeah, Michael uses the example of the Red Bull RB6 kit, which costs 100 Swiss francs in Switzerland.
It's a lot of money for a model kit.
It is, and he points out that prices online are often in a similar range, so it's not just a Swiss thing.
Right. He mentions a couple of reasons for those high prices. First, there are licensing fees. Like if they're making a model of a Red Bull Formula One car, they have to pay Red Bull for the right to use their branding and design.
That makes sense. Companies don't usually give away their intellectual property for free.
Definitely. And those licensing fees get passed on to the consumer. But Michael also says that Tamiya's own pricing strategy plays a role. They've built up a reputation for quality, and they know people are willing to pay a premium for that.
So it's a bit of a balancing act between what the market will bear and what's actually a fair price.
Exactly. And this is where it gets interesting. Michael specifically calls out Tamiya's re-releases of their old 112 scale Formula One cars from the 1970s. He says they're basically using the same old molds with maybe some updated instructions decals and a small photo-etched detail sheet.
But they're charging significantly more for these re-releases, sometimes up to 30 Swiss francs more.
Which seems a little questionable, right? I mean, you're essentially paying a premium for a slightly spruce-up version of an old kit.
Especially when you consider that there are often aftermarket detail upsets available for these older kits that are even more comprehensive than what Tamiya is offering.
So it makes you wonder what you're really paying for in those cases.
Yeah, it raises questions about whether those price increases are really justified.
Okay, so price is a big one. But Michael also talks about availability. And this is interesting because at first glance, it seems like Tamiya kits are available everywhere.
Yeah, you see them in toy stores, hobby shops, online. They're pretty ubiquitous.
Michael even uses the term Platthirsch to describe them, which is a German word that basically means top dog or the dominant player in the market.
So they're definitely not hard to find. But
Wow.
what's the issue with availability then?
Well, Michael's point is that this dominance in places like toy stores can actually limit the visibility of other model brands.
Especially for younger modelers or people who don't have easy access to the internet or specialty hobby shops.
Exactly. If all you're seeing is Tamiya kits, you might not even realize that there are other options out there.
That's a good point. It's like going to a restaurant that only serves pizza. You might love pizza, but wouldn't you at least like to know what else is on the menu?
Exactly. And that's kind of Michael's concern, that Tamiya's dominance, especially in those entry-level markets, could be inadvertently limiting people's exposure to the full range of model building experiences.
I see. So it's not that Tamiya kits are hard to find. It's that their ubiquity might be overshadowing other brands.
Right. Okay. And then the last criticism Michael brings up is a little more subjective. It's about the perception of Tamiya within the modeling community.
Like, is there a stigma attached to building Tamiya kits?
Not necessarily a stigma, but Michael says he's encountered a certain amount of snobbery from some Tamiya enthusiasts.
What do you mean by snobbery?
Like he's heard people at exhibitions say things like, nothing beats Tamiya, or real modelers only build Tamiya.
Oh, so that kind of elitist attitude.
Exactly. And while brand loyalty is fine to a certain extent, Michael's point is that this kind of attitude can be off-putting to newcomers or people who build other brands.
It can make people feel like they're not part of the in crowd if they're not building Tamiya.
Yeah. And it can discourage people from trying other brands or even exploring different aspects of the hobby.
It's like saying, if you're not wearing designer clothes, you're not fashionable. It just creates unnecessary divisions and limits people's choices.
Totally. Okay, so to sum it all up, Tamiya is a company with a long history of innovation. They produce an incredibly wide range of models that are known for their detail and generally excellent engineering. And their products are readily available pretty much everywhere.
But they can also be expensive. Their dominance in certain markets might be limiting the visibility of other brands, and there's a perception of elitism among some Tamiya fans.
So it's a mixed bag, right? They have a lot of strengths, but also some weaknesses.
It's important to be aware of both.
Definitely. And hopefully this deep dive has given you a good overview of Tamiya, both the good and the bad. Now it's up to you to decide what you think.
To Tamiya or not to Tamiya, that is the question.
Uh-huh. Well said. So here's a final thought for you to consider as you're planning your next model project. What factors are most important to you? Is it the build, experience, the level of detail, the cost, or even the brand reputation?
It's probably a combination of all those things.
Probably.
Yeah.
But it's worth thinking about what you prioritize, because ultimately the most important thing is to choose a kit that you'll enjoy building.
And that will bring you a sense of satisfaction when it's finished.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of Tamiya. Now go forth and build something amazing.
Happy modeling.